Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Edge and Flow podcast. TJ Schwartz here with my co host, Lucas Burnley. We're excited to talk about parenting and how that fits in with being an entrepreneur, if you call it that, and a knife maker or a machine shop owner or whatever someone might be. We both have young kids, and we've been working on how that balance plays out. And it's funny
Or
because
doesn't balance.
just yeah, exactly. It just what 24 hours ago we tried to record this podcast. We got 11 minutes in, and it's not parenting related, but I had an AC guy call me because holy cow, we've had our AC out for 3 days, and we're trying to get a hold of them. Their system's down. He calls me and tells me he's 3 minutes away from my house during our podcast, so we were like 11 minutes in. So we're jumping back into it, but we had that little refresher. It's kind of like the
Yeah.
lost episode.
Well,
I
and
think we
that's kind of indicative, right? I mean, of a lot of the stuff that we're experiencing right now, which is, I think most times we're feeling like work is our priority,
mhm,
but there are these immovable objects, which are our relationships with our kids and the schedules and timelines around them that can just come in a second
mhm,
and pull you off task,
right. And I
right?
think in
Which
those
is a
11
maker's,
minutes,
yeah,
I think we did go over how the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids,
right, yeah.
but that's, I'm done talking about that. We don't need to do that anymore. I think we talked about, was it the existence of aliens and like who we voted
Yeah,
for in every
proof.
election,
Right.
and
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
we'll move on to parenting.
Don't need to
Yeah.
rehash that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
mean, this is an interesting period of time. I mean, kind of for both of us, right? So I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and you have,
A 4.5, 5 month old and a 2.5 year old.
yeah. So like we're kind of like fully in it right
Yeah.
now. I've spent the majority of my adult life like working kind of unencumbered, my own schedule. I work a lot. Work is like a passion, kind of obsession type of deal, and figuring out how to fit that in the framework of a family and family life, and like our relationships with our spouses and our kids. Man, it's a learning process, huh?
Oh, it's a project. And it changes because, you go from one kid to two kids, and then as kids grow, they have different needs. I know, like my wife, does the whole breastfeeding thing, and so with a baby, it's a little hard for me to get super involved at that age. I mean, I'll hold him while she's doing whatever she wants to do, but then as soon as they get to the age where my daughter, she's 2.5, and she wants to go ride a bike, and my wife's busy, and it's like that tear you feel where it's like I know I need to flip parts on the CNC, but she's crying because she wants to go outside and ride her bike. And it's like you want to be rigid because you want to be productive, but at the same time, sometimes you
Well,
can't
it's
say
like
no. It feels
disciplined,
good.
right? Like you want
Yeah.
to be disciplined. And what's happening is the focus of the discipline has to change. It
Hmm.
has to be reframed.
Right.
So essentially, I think you had said like you're really trying to be out of the shop by 5 p.m.
Right.
But you realize that like you need some like self-care and the ability to like take care of your body. So you're leaving at 4 p.m., hitting the gym so you can still be with your family by 5.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think like self-employed, those are the things that are very easy to just ignore.
Yeah. I think compartmentalization is helpful for me. My brain does work that way. I don't know if it works for everybody that way, but if I tell myself from a discipline standpoint that at 5, maybe just a little bit after 5, I'm going to be headed into the house and I'm going to be settling down for the evening. I'm not going to be doing any more work, with the kids being as young as they are. And my wife has her hand full all day. It's not one of the main things is like, I want to take something off her plate for the evening, because that's,
Right.
that's when she gets a little break, is when I'm done. And so compartmentalizing is beneficial because it partly, like, from between me and my wife, is that there's also an understanding, and so there's less friction.
Right.
Because if at 5 o'clock, if that's kind of an expectation, unless there's some special circumstance, then no one there, you don't have to re-communicate every day. And then, oh, I'm working longer tonight, she didn't expect it, less
Right.
today, she didn't expect it. There's a certain set of expectations there, and to be pretty rigid about it has been the best way I've found to handle it.
Yeah. It lets you know kind of, I mean, yeah, what you're going into. And that's just good communication. Right.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Shows over the last couple of years have been really difficult for me because they always extend past like normal working hours for me. I end up working like 7 days a week. And so we're really trying to figure out like, okay, like what does it look like for me to get ready for a show at this point? And it's prep might be 2 to 3 times as long as it's always been for me.
Mhm.
And I've always kind of thrived in that, 2 month window. There's some anxiety, there's some stress, but it fuels a lot of creativity. It still works that way, but like the cost on the tail end is higher, and it doesn't affect me, it affects my family.
Mhm.
So I think those kind of ideas where we're just having to reframe and kind of like, man, refigure out things that have worked for a long time. Like, how do they work now?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
exactly. And one of the things is I'm like you, I was pretty unencumbered for a lot of years, better part of a decade before getting married and having kids when I was running my business. And one of the things I would find is I would have days that were less productive and then days where I would get on a hot streak and I would just capture that flow state like you talk about and just I want to go 15 hours. You know what I mean? I'm not
absolutely.
stopping. I'm just going to, squeeze this for every drop of juice while I'm feeling this good. And then, so not being able to do that with kids is requires a pretty big shift in like how you approach things because if you wait until you get flow state or whatever and then it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not going to work the way it does when you're able to work till 2 in the morning. You know what I mean? So you have to
How are you dealing with that right now? Have you
for
figured out like a solution?
for me, I think strategy with motivation is important because I think motivation gets this rap of being elusive and it's something that's like you can't put your finger on and you can't capture it and stuff. I don't know if that's true. I think it can be like cultivated and created, and I think it starts with, how you wake up in the morning, when you wake up in the morning, what you do right when you get out of bed. There's that, the talk. I think it's Admiral McRaven. He's this Navy SEAL who gave the "Make Your Bed" speech.
Hmm.
And it's
We're
a
talking like
metaphor.
morning routine.
Yeah, he's not
Like,
literally talking about making a bed. He's talking
right.
about do something productive the second you wake up and feel good about it. And I also read a book called the Motivation Manifesto, which had the
Hmm.
same premise, which is motivation breeds motivation. So if you're waiting for it, it's not going to come. And
Well, that's
so,
why there's all these classic tropes too, right? Like object in motion stays in motion. Like that is a
mhm,
prime example of this idea of like you get up, you start moving, you have your routine, your ritual. Those are things that those are not problems that you have to solve every day,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So you're starting off with momentum,
hmm,
right?
yeah. And one of the things too is like because the way I've approached it is I have really bad brain fog when I wake up in the morning. Like I've always been really mentally groggy when I wake up, just really really groggy. And until I start getting coffee on board and that starts to hit, it's always been a challenge. And so I'll wake up really early in the past, and I would do that, and I would get on that schedule of waking up with my sleep schedule. I'd have it all dialed, but I get up and I feel like I couldn't really put my mind to a task, and it just
Hmm.
felt shaky in the mornings. And so I started reading first thing, and when I read, it's like maybe I'll read the very first page right when I wake up and I don't even remember it and I'll like reread it. And then after I start reading, then like maybe for 5 minutes, I'm kind of rereading paragraphs. And then,
Hmm.
30 minutes later, I'm fully, engaged and I'm reading and I'm enjoying it. It's, a book I'm interested in. And it's like an exercise, a mission to like wake my brain up. And then once I feel like I've got that behind me, then the day just rolls and it feels really, really good. And then once I roll, then the odds of getting a productive day finished before 5 p.m. is much, much higher. Whereas if it's a little bit shaky and you're trying to wait for that catch where things like the spark
Right.
happens and you really get productive, for some people it's in the afternoon. I used to be that way,
Yeah.
but I've had to like create an environment where that's earlier, where that real big surge of energy and motivation happens earlier.
Well, I think that is part of it too, right? Which are these expectations of time, and you had kind of touched on it earlier, which is this idea of like the creative spark or inspiration. And I forget what it's like one of the quotes that just always floating around, but like the idea that what is it? Inspirations for amateurs. Like
Hmm.
the rest of us just go to work.
Hmm.
I think there's a part of that that is pretty relevant to any creative process, which is it's different to wait for the spark than to just begin, right?
Hmm.
So but I noticed that depending on what I get wrapped into early in the day, like I know that I'm always going to have like a 4 hour block that I can focus minimum, right? If I start off with the most valuable work in that time, like the rest of my day is better throughout. If I like get into the shop and like start answering emails, my whole day slides. But if
Right.
like I just go into the grinding room or I fire up the CNC or start doing design work, it's enough that it like just jump starts that part
Yeah.
of my brain and I'm in it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But like you said, now I don't have 14 hours of it. I might have 6
Yeah.
or 8. And some of this too is also like you had mentioned machine shop owners. When you have employees, I think there's a difference too because some of the work continues on past
Right.
you.
Right.
Whereas like where we're at right now, it's kind of like you stop working, the work stops working.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's been a good project for me. One of the I think we're talking about parenting as it applies to the business, but I think this conversation about compartmentalizing the business work really is the foundation of how I view the parenting side because
Mm-hmm.
once I have the time available and the free mind space, parenting is just a natural thing for me, you know what I mean? Like it's something I
Right.
enjoy, so it's like going and taking care of the kids, but if you can bookend the business work and have it be really productive to where you don't feel guilt walking away from it, I think you've already won at that point. But
Yeah, I would agree. The idea that like what you've done today is enough.
yeah, yeah,
That's huge. I struggle with that
hmm,
a lot. And it's if I leave the shop feeling that way, it affects like my interactions with my
yeah,
family
e-
afterwards. Cause I'm not,
exactly.
I can't like fully be present. I'm stressed about something that I left or didn't get done or like feel like I should have accomplished. And that's like worthless.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's done. The day is done. Like I'm much better off being fully engaged with my family than like worrying about the work that I didn't get done. Like
yeah,
it's going to be there tomorrow,
exactly.
but
Yeah,
they're
there's
hard habits to break.
yeah, trying to flip those switches when you need to. It's
Yeah.
important. And one thing that I found that I'm still struggling with, this is probably my biggest hurdle, is if I have my rhythm figured out, I get up, I read, drink coffee, I maybe stretch or do something. My wife's usually up, kids are up. I talk to them at least for a minute, maybe have a little bit of coffee with my wife, and then I get in the shop. And then my issue is I have to often leave the house at some point to do errands. And it's something about leaving the house and like mixing the day up or breaking the day up. Even if it's like a 1 hour thing or like a 2 hour thing, I go out and do something, meet a couple people, do a few things business related, and come back. And it's like, man, it just the disruption factor of leaving the shop, I
Yep.
haven't mastered. I don't know
Well, and
what to do
that's
there.
so there's a couple things that I've done over the years. Like working at home for so long, like I used to do a reverse commute, which is going to go kind of against what you just said. But the idea that like I'm starting off in the shop, I know I'm going to be there all day. So I would go out and I would start my day like at a coffee shop. And I used to go to this coffee shop where like there's a group of guys that all sat around and like kind of talked. I would have my breakfast and then I would go to work. And it
Hmm.
at that point, it was just me. Like, so I knew I wasn't going to see people for the rest of the day.
Hmm.
It worked awesome. Moving
Interesting.
forward, yeah, right. So reverse commute, helpful. A little bit of social interaction, kind of like, wake up, whatever, read the news, move on. At this point, I know that throughout the course of my day, I'm going to have more interaction with people. So that's where that like 4 hour window comes in, where it's like, if so basically like my morning starts like I wake up probably like 5:15, 5:30 usually. Um, Depending on the day, the one thing that I do every day is I stretch. So I do like a 15-minute like stretch. Huge, helps my body like feel like trash if I don't do it. I drink like a bunch of water. So I do like a 16-ounce water, I stretch, and then I do 5 minutes of journaling.
Mhm.
Right. So
That's
that's
awesome.
kind of the everyday. And then some days I'll surf, some days I'll go to the gym. When I come back, the goal is just to go straight to work.
Mhm.
Um, and that's that 4 hour. So I know that someone's going to call on the phone. I'm going to respond to an email. And from that point forward, it's going to degrade. But if I can get that 4 hours, I've kind of
Mhm.
figured that out as like that almost makes the day,
Yeah.
which sounds crazy. But I mean, it also ties into this idea of like the 8-hour workday as like a construct of the Industrial Revolution. Like there's some stuff
Yeah.
in there where it's like if you can get 4 good focused hours, that's pretty good.
Yeah, especially from a creative standpoint with the
Yeah.
way we design and that being a big part of our business.
Yeah.
It's a
Well, yeah.
I've talked to friends about that before, that it's almost like if 3 months of whatever you're doing leads to a spark that creates something, like let's say you invented the speed safe. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? It's like you could retire on that design. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like there's a duality to it, because like I said, there's an aspect of it that's like compartmentalization, focus, not waiting for inspiration, but at the same time the self-care thing comes in, where it's like if you take time off and you do things that are like cathartic, it can, like, then you, in a way, you're kind of trying to cultivate motivation and inspiration, but in a little bit different way. Like you're waiting for it. Like maybe it's a long term game. Like maybe if I go backpacking, like I'll have some thoughts, maybe I won't. And so that is a little bit of a pivot from what we were just talking about, but I think that's also important.
Well, I think that's like this long game, right?
Mm,
I think 100% necessary, and that I think it works both on the parenting side and on the business slash creative side, right? Which is like there's no machine that if you run it at 100% all the time is going to like do better.
hmm.
I
Right.
mean, a human especially, like we're not meant to run that way. Like I think
Right.
you have to create space. So it's like if your entire existence is in the work of work, not you actually don't have a chance to like reassess or grow past or have certain types of thoughts. I think if you don't give yourself those like intentional breaks,
Hmm.
and I'm seeing like I had never spent a lot of time around kids, and I'm kind of an introvert, so realizing like, oh, my kids are still like they're still people, and I still need like recharge time away from them,
Hmm.
and it starts to become like a quality versus quantity scenario. Like I know that if I have some time away, I'm a better parent,
Hmm.
um, arguably a better partner. In the past, I knew that about work. So these are the things that like with kids we're having to like integrate, right? Which is your overall like time pie. The sections get small,
Hmm.
right? So you being able to like get back on task. So it used to be that if I was in that hyper focus like production mode, I might end my day and then still be able to go into like design work and still hook into that like flow state
Hmm.
and move forward. At this point, I can't do that. Like I'm going to get one thing.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of it feels counterintuitive to give yourself intentional periods of not working or self care or like time away, but I think it improves the overall system,
Yeah.
right? Which is like kind of what we're talking about.
And there's also an aspect of like, I think there's a view that stepping away from work means that you should just totally relax, which is
Hmm.
fine. There's an importance in that too, but I think there's something also to doing something hard that isn't involving the hard things you're dealing with at work or in a parenting situation.
Right.
So, for example, hiking, backpacking, I know you're a surfer, like things that are difficult that really
Right.
like stretch your mind and your body and make you just like you have to get over a hump in some way. Even though it's time away, it is recharging, at least for me,
Right.
because like having a big victory that is completely unrelated to what you're working on just brings you this new confidence. And it's such a departure from what you were focused on before that it feels like it was rest, even though it wasn't at all, from like a,
Right. And I would say that's probably like a case by case basis. Like you and
mhm,
I probably have some of that, like, um, yeah, that desire for like placing yourself into somewhat difficult situations.
right.
We find personal growth in that. As I've gotten older, I have worked to allow myself to do nothing. Like
Right.
there's times where I'm like, no, like it could be, I think there's like an anxiety component where I want to be busy. And sometimes like doing the hard thing it like scratches that same itch. So it's like for me, I think there's value in being able to like fully throw it into neutral.
Right.
Um, for me with the kids, that's like like a prime example of this would be like, I'm going to hang out with the kids this evening. And then I'm like, oh, but I'm also going to like organize this closet or like try to fix something in the house or like clean, where it's like my brain is looking for something to be busy with
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
just like hanging out and like reading and playing games with my kids.
Yeah, I think doing nothing is something that I have a very hard time doing, and I think is probably something I should get better at. And I mean, even just in conversations with my wife, she'll notice it. You know, it's like finally there's an hour where nothing's happening, the kids are asleep, and my brain just goes, "Oh, I got to go put a sprinkler out," or "Oh, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go do this," or "I'm gonna call my dad. I was gonna ask him about something," you know. And it's like that's not something that I do well. Is just be a little bit idle and just
Yeah.
introspect or spend time
Yeah. Send an
without.
email, like, oh, I
Yeah,
got to take a note, like whatever it is.
yeah. That's something. That's a great point. It's something I know I do, and I've always leaned into it because I've always like used it as a power, as like that I don't sit still, that I'm always going to do something, and I think it is beneficial. But I think leaned into too much, it's maybe the opposite. You know.
Well, and I would just almost pose like the challenge that it is difficult. Like doing nothing and being present is difficult.
Mhm.
Um, and in that, so you're like, okay, we like doing things that are difficult, and like there's value in that. And you're like, well, that's really hard just to like be present and sit still. You
Yeah.
know, I think too, as this relates to parenting, I think it ties in with this idea that like for myself, like seeing like how busy some kids are. Like my kids don't always need to be like crazy scheduled with all kinds of
Mhm.
activities.
Yeah.
Like sometimes they can just hang out and like being bored and like figuring it out. I think there's actually a
Yeah.
huge amount of value in that. Like,
Not
you
being
know,
overstimulated, and yeah, being able to see the world that's immediately around you rather than having to go out and be fed, even if it's something that's healthy and cool, like a museum or a water park. It's like,
yep. Or activity or
yeah.
what, like we had Bo in jujitsu. We started him in jujitsu. And what it was right after he would get out of school. And what we saw was like he was coming home from school and he's tired, right? Like he's
Mhm.
been playing all day. And I mean, he's just turned 5. You put him into a jujitsu class, and it's like a structured environment that's hot and hard. And you're like, this, we're watching him just kind of like squid around and like roll on the floor and like not fully connect. And we're like, this is not for right now.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
that's not what he needs. He needs to be able to just like come home, hang out. Like, he goes in his room, draws, and like plays Legos and stuff. And I was like, that he's recharging,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and it's amazing talking about parenting is what you can learn looking at your kids about yourself, you know what I mean? Because they're little humans that obviously have a part of your brain in them, and so it's like the things that they're learning about themselves, you kind of forget that you once learned, or maybe didn't, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's an interesting side of parenting for sure.
Well, and craft too. I think like or make like you think entrepreneurship sometimes. I think it relates. I think being a maker in different or creative in different elements. But I think I want to be really careful what I teach my boys about like what that means. If they get out of the house and they are like they think that their entire value is based around like the things that they make and the hard work that they do, I don't feel like I will have done my job.
Mhm.
Like that's not why I make, but I
Yeah.
realize that that's what I'm modeling a lot of times. Like,
Yeah.
you know, this like it's like a workaholic mentality and I'm like, okay, this is like a backwards thought process. So it's man, it's crazy how like intertwined the two things are,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And
know?
the idea of setting an example of being a hard worker, but not to the detriment of, you know, their vision on how to operate, in that, oh, like working in the face of all other things in life instead of like addressing other problems, or, you know, spending time with the kids. Maybe it's noon and they're playing in the sprinkler and you go out and play with them. Like like I said, it's a balance of not being a workaholic, but displaying hard work attributes that I think are incredibly valuable. And
Absolutely. Like
that's
in a healthy version, right?
mhm,
Well, I think we had touched on the like the when we were talking about being self-employed, which is like building a flexible system only matters if you're flexible.
Right.
If you build this system that's flexible to where you can go outside, literally go outside and play with your kids in the sprinklers, but you
Right.
never do it, you didn't create a flexible system,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
And one thing I'd like to do eventually, it's they're yet too young for this, but I grew up with my dad being working from home, self-employed, doing the maker type lifestyle, and I remember it was always an open door policy. So it's like I could just go to the shop anytime. Like there's days where I'd spend probably he'd be out there for 8, 10 hours, and I was probably out there 5 of those hours dinking around doing something. And so,
What age did that like start for you?
oh, really young. I mean, well before kindergarten. But
That's pretty good.
but
Not a lot of like, our shops are a little bit different.
that's what I was gonna say is he
Yeah.
had the benefit of being a leather shop, whereas like as long as he kept the knives and the pokey things out of the way, like what are you gonna do? Then I'd play with the dogs because the dogs were in the shop and
Yeah.
stuff. But with a CNC and an air compressor and stuff, it's like that does make me think though that creating a child friendly shop is something maybe I should think about. Or maybe a certain portion of the shop or something like that.
I don't even know if it's child like, well, okay, two thoughts. I see where you're going with that. I think it's almost like teaching your kids about anything dangerous,
Hmm.
right? There's respect that comes into play, and there's like age ranges where that starts to make sense. So it's like
Hmm.
you can't expect a kid who's 3 to have like a high level of like self-control and understanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like don't push. There's just the brains aren't wired for that. They're too
Yeah.
curious. Like Bo at 5 now, like I will literally be like, all right, man, like we went to Overland Expo this weekend. I'm like, we had the talk when we were going in. I was like, all right, like a lot of these things are special to people. They're things that they either built or they're selling. Look with your eyes. And if you want to touch something, you have to ask. And like we'd walk around and I'd just see him, like the hand would start moving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd be like, hey, Bo, what did we talk about? And like at one point, I had like saw he's like undoing like a knot on someone's like tent. I'm like, he's just curious, you
Yep.
know?
Right.
That happens in the shop, and like there can be catastrophic injury,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? But
One.
so I guess where I was going with that, I'll wrap it up, but like the idea of bringing them in, like with Bo, I used to let him come in and when I would be starting cycles on the CNC and I'd be like, all right, you're going to like push the green button.
Mhm.
And he loved it. He's got a little set of headphones or like earmuffs. So we come in, he puts on his earmuffs, his safety glasses, and then he can like interact and hang out for a little while.
That's awesome.
Um, and now we're doing the same thing with Winston.
That's great. Yeah, no. Delta loves watching the CNC machine. I'll
Yeah.
bring her out there. The biggest thing right now is I've got a beast of a just piston air compressor in a small shop, and it's just deafening. Like it like shakes the whole foundation of the whole house virtually. So
Weird off topic question. How many gallons is your air compressor?
60?
60 gallon.
Yeah.
So I had a compressor die. I just got a new Kaiser, got delivered. My compressor died the day before, and like hooking up a Kaiser is kind of a process. So I grabbed one from Harbor Freight. Super quiet,
That's what mine
works
is.
great, inexpensive.
Yeah, Essential Pneumatic.
Yeah, I
That's
think
what
it's a central pneumatic.
yeah.
It like looks like the California Air Tools, but it's like I don't know if it's a scroll type, but it's quiet.
Yeah, so mine is, but I got it used because I was looking at some other ones, and this is a big tangent, but this one popped up. Like the guy bought it and had it for like a year in a shop and never even turned it on. He never even
Great.
got it wired. So I got it like half off, but it's a 3-cylinder piston, 60
Yeah,
gallon, but it's so freaking loud. I mean,
yeah.
I bought rubber feet for it because there's gravel behind my shop on dirt. So it's just gravel on dirt. Standing on the gravel on dirt next to the house, you can feel it through your feet when that compressor would kick on through the like 4 inches of gravel.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is able to do that, but I put it on rubber feet. So a screw or rotary style, something or other. That's probably the biggest barrier for me for having like a kid friendly shop because
Yeah.
my shop's actually not a dangerous place right now. Cause the CNC is one thing where it's like, if you're not inside of it, it's
And the
not the,
buttons are high. Like they're not,
yeah,
Delta's not going to climb up and like
yeah,
get in it.
yeah.
It's
So,
like table height tools. And we're
right.
not wood shops either. So it's not like they're going to walk up to a table saw. Well, you have a table saw, you know,
Yeah, it's not, I store it though.
so you
So
store
it's
it.
not, yeah.
But I think like that as a process moving forward, it's another thing to remember to kind of include our kids
Yeah.
in. Um, and just kind of like letting them be in the environment, bringing them around, letting them do like little jobs. Like I brought Bo out, like I made a base for my surface grinder coolant tank.
Hmm.
It's like, cool, I'm painting. Well, I'm like, my 4-year-old can paint. So like you bring him out, hang out in the shop and we paint.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
That's
we're
awesome.
a lot of times, at least in my case, I'm so used to doing things myself and just getting the way that I work, like almost just stuck in my head. It's just that I forget to include them.
Hmm.
So that's something that I've been working on lately, which
Yeah.
is like, oh, like cool, you could help me like, I don't know, tape things or
Yeah.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
clean. I don't
I
know.
think that's an angle that I'm definitely going to work on moving forward. My kids, like my oldest, she's just getting old enough where that actually matters. You know, where she's communicating now. I can talk to her. She's got dexterity. Like she could actually do some little helper things here and there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I haven't really implemented yet. But just taking it from my childhood, that was formative because I remember the reason I brought that up initially is we were talking about the workaholic balance, and I would say my dad it was in the shop like way more than 40 hours a week,
Right.
way more. But I never once thought of him as a workaholic, and I think it was because I would walk in there and he'd be like, "What kind of music you want to listen to?" And he'd put on a song, and I'd play and do stuff, and it was like it didn't feel like like that he was distant and gone. You know, it was like, well, that's like his space, and I go in there, and then I would leave, and he may be putting in 12-hour days for like weeks straight, but I didn't seem to notice. You know,
That
and,
is, I mean, your dad sounds like he basically did it about the perfect way, which is one, he was always accessible to you.
right,
You always felt included. But at the same time, it's not like you're coming in and being put to work sweeping floors or like something
right,
that you're just coming in and playing,
yeah,
making like the argument for your current timeline, like from his standpoint, like you are very successful doing your own thing. I would have to assume that he's pretty psyched on that and probably
yeah.
had something to do with it.
I think
Like,
so. Yeah. Replicating the way my dad's lifestyle is was a huge part of why I did what I did. It was, dropping out of college and stuff. It was like, that was just normal to me. That was normal. I couldn't see it any other way. And my mom never worked full time. She was like part time or would work from home some and stuff. So I never, like a 9 to 5, I had no idea what it even looked like from the outside
mm-hmm.
or inside. I didn't understand. Not that I even viewed it negatively. Like I didn't. I just did what I saw done in front of me.
Right. Yeah, I would say that I definitely have some elements of the way that I've worked over the years that are I don't know how to phrase it, even like the influenced by my father.
Hmm.
Some of them are positive, some of them are negative,
Hmm.
but like negative in the way that it made me work very hard,
Right.
like
Right.
to accomplish like something different for my family, I think.
Hmm.
But then like being super inspired by like his level of creativity and like capability. But he just I think there were a lot of areas in his life where he was constantly trying to get like just struggling to get to like a stable point.
Yeah.
And so I
Stability
think
is
I did
big.
that really early, right? And so I mean, same thing, prime example, like what are we like it's so transparent with your kids when they see the work.
Hmm.
Like we don't have like a job that is separate where they can't like the conversations at the dinner table like are a lot of times there's some work that comes in. They can come out to the shop and see me. They they're gonna pick up like the overall like vibe
Yeah.
of your life,
Yeah. For sure.
you know?
Yeah. It becomes it's almost kind of like the same mindset or concept of like growing a garden with kids. So they show like what is a tomato. It's not like the
Right.
synthesized piece of plastic that tastes good. You know what I mean? Like this is
Right.
what it comes from, or like having a chicken or something. I think
Right.
there's brilliance in that and showing a kid what that actually is that you're eating. And I think it's the same way with commerce. You know what I mean? Like if you're involved in some kind of career that you can show like this is what money is. This is
Right.
why money exists. This is how I make it. This is what I do with my hands and whatnot. I think it all goes together.
Well, even I mean, you think about how many adults, if you say that you're a knife maker, have said like Oh, I didn't even know that was like a job. Like I thought it's like knives are like a product that's made in a factory someplace else.
Hmm. Yeah.
Kids are the exact same way, right? Like if you're able to show them, I think multiple, I don't know, just multiple ways of interacting like with work, I think there's a lot of value in that. So like for me, I'll try to get my boys to experience like other versions of that too.
Hmm.
You know, not just like, oh, this is like how your family works and like this is like what it's like to be a maker, or, you know, it's tricky. So actually you were talking about like the growing tomatoes thing. This ties in pretty well. So Maddie works with me,
Hmm.
right? But she's also a primary caregiver. So over the last few years, like her role has shifted really hard into like taking care of us as a family.
Hmm.
And it's super, I think it's super hard for her in certain ways because like what we're talking about, right? Like being able to like hook into that part of your brain where you just get into a flow. With like Winston wasn't in school, Bo was in school, she'd have like 4 hours. Super hard for her to get into
Oh
like a
yeah.
creative flow. Um, and one thing we actually did was we built like a big garden because it's that same thought process of like creating value and connection for your family.
Hmm.
So that is actually something that she can still do, feel productive, include the kids in, and there's value in the kids seeing like where their food's
Yeah.
coming from and like digging in the dirt.
Are you guys growing any strawberries?
We're not currently growing strawberries.
We've got some. I wonder what they taste like because
Nice.
Delta every day wants to go look at it, and she gets the 2 or 3 ripe ones every
Yeah.
day, and I don't even know what they taste like. So,
Yeah, but that's
yeah,
I guess that kind of goes into the that flexibility idea too, which is like, man, okay, like this thing is not working. How do we reframe it? How do we adjust it? Like, you know,
yeah, yeah. No, it's and yeah, bringing in that conversation about your wife. Yeah, my wife's being the primary caregiver. She's so when we got married, we had Deltas not long after. So my wife basically went from her day job to getting married to then becoming the primary caregiver. And so she hasn't yet gotten involved in the business. And I think that day might come, but it'll
right.
be, when she has more time after the kids are, entertained by school or preschool or whatever they end up. But for now, I definitely admire the difficulty of the primary caregiver lifestyle. It is like, it's a remarkable job.
I
I
mean,
mean,
for me, it's I can't even wrap my brain around it.
yeah, yeah,
Like to be able for me to be able to come into work, like I realize, like, oh man, that's like she gives me the space to be able to like focus in this way. That is, man, I like it's hard. So
right.
tying into that conversation, like a lot of what Maddie has done in the past has been like administrative, right? Like and because I have like the knife making skill set. So over the years, like she's super creative and we've tried to figure out ways for her to like have hands on. So she's done anodizing, she's like done bead blasting, but it's almost like the caregiving thing where a lot of times there's like customers to talk to or like a drop to do the website or photography hits creative a little bit, but it's product photography and it's usually like around a drop.
Hmm.
um, but we we just started setting up a leatherworking area, um, basically specifically for Maddie. So like we got like a clicker press,
Nice.
and we're bringing. So our friend Joe Wu had Scout Leather. We're bringing in some of those products that we used to purchase from him in house. He's actually here this week hanging out and setting her up. And it's like it's that idea, man, of like, okay, we have the flexibility. How do we integrate that into your workflow, even if your workflow is limited? And then I look at that and I'm like, leatherwork is something we can also like bring the kids in for
Yeah, yeah.
because it's not loud. It's not big power tools. Like,
Hmm.
so it's this, I don't know, I guess it's kind of holistic, but it's something that over the last couple of years has definitely created a lot of stress.
Yeah. So
But it feels like it's leveling out.
you spent like 10 to 15 years building your business alone, right? That or
Yes.
thereabouts.
Yep.
How does it feel bringing another person in like your wife, how does it feel? Because there's a certain sense of like loss of control, and not that that's really what it is. That's a negative way to say it,
Right.
but
Right. No,
like
but I
there's a
understand what you mean.
how does it
Um,
feel for you?
so let's see. I think it depends on where the help comes in. Right. So I had a woman who worked in the office for like 5 years for me a long time ago. And I realized at that point, I was like, okay, where can I hire that is a skill set that is not like my primary skill set? And then we're not going to be like, I was in a really small shop at the time. Like I work the shop and then I have help in the office.
Hmm.
And then I've had like people work in the shop where they're parts finishing or just doing prep work. And that like, it's almost like you talk about compartmentalization.
Hmm.
I think that with a spouse or a partner in some way having compartmentalization where they're able to have autonomy over certain processes because I'm a control freak and I like built this business around everything in my head is really important.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle. We still work on it. But ultimately it goes back to that flexibility thing. So Maddie comes from the museum world. Um, she moved to New Mexico. She had a job that kind of transferred from museums into tech, which was she was working at a company that built these like really cool interactive displays for museums.
Hmm.
And when she came on to work with me was when she was pregnant with Bo.
Hmm.
And we realized we're like, okay, you are at some point you're going to have to like go on maternity leave or things are going to change. And we realized like, okay, you can work when you want, you can work a few hours a day. If you're feeling crummy, you can not work, you can just be pregnant.
Hmm.
So it's like super organic
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
in that process of just like familial kind of like structure and support. It feels like super old school, right?
Hmm.
Like you're like like
Yeah.
homesteading or something. Just
Yeah.
like there's work that needs to be done. Who can do the work? We do the work.
Right, right. Yeah, no, we're still finding our way through that. Like I said, because her time is going to be more free in a couple years, and that's yet to be seen how that'll pan out. Growing up, it wasn't that way. It was like my dad, the saddle making, the leather work was his domain, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like that was like I think for their marriage, that's like an operational tool they had was that it's like that's his world, and
Right.
so when he walks over there, like that's his world, and she has her world, and so I think can be a good way to do it. And then the sharing of the business in a sense can be a good way to do it. And I'm not sure which way we'll go. I don't know. I mean, it seems like
The
there's
beauty is you can try different ways. I've checked in with Maddie a lot of times over the years and have said like, look, if this is ever feeling like not what you want to do, or you have an interest that's like outside of our business, like I fully support her pursuing
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Right. Um, I think as like the primary in the business in a certain way, I see that she is really interested in the creative processes. So
Mhm.
I've tried to help to create space and resources to like to help with that, right?
Mhm.
Whether that's like, so we're using like third party logistics. Well, Maddie was doing all the shipping. If we can use a 3PL for our shipping, that frees up X amount of time for Maddie to be able to focus on in some other area.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's tricky. It's definitely
Yeah.
not without its struggles, but again, it's this overall kind of ecosystem that is like at the end of the day, like it provides for a family and it provides for us as like individuals, um, and hopefully provides like a good upbringing for our kids. That's the
Yeah.
hope.
Are you excited to be brought in for a career day when your son's older?
Yeah. I mean, I guess with a group of kids, it's hard. Maybe it might be like harder to explain, but at a dinner party, it's always fun to explain it. So
Mhm. Right.
should be good.
Yeah, you get a lot of interesting looks with I'm a freelance knife guy, maker, designer
Yeah.
slash
Yeah. How do you
aficionado.
do that? How do you do
Yeah.
that in a career day? I guess I would say you'd have to like frame it in a way that would be like relevant. Like,
Mhm.
I make kitchen knives. I don't know what it would
Yeah.
be
You have to
for a kid to
bring
be
it
like,
down to
you're a
earth.
knife. I'm a
I guess
knifeologist.
the reason I asked that question was it could be illuminating on, like, how Bo or Winston view you as far as what you
Right.
do. You know what I mean? How do you feel about how they view what you do at this young age?
Bo knows, Bo understands like what we do. And he'll like tell people like my dad's a knife maker.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I actually, at this point in my life, it's pretty easy to talk about with like adults, like what I do,
Mhm.
and to explain it and frame it in a way. When I was younger, it was super hard. Um, I think some of that was just around the insecurity of like doing my own thing, but not being at a point of success, at least in my own head, that I was like super confident about. Like I grew up real non-traditional. I didn't go to high school. I got my GED. I didn't go to college. And so I think there was always this element of like almost like imposter syndrome or something to be like, oh, like, I'm self-employed or like I own my own business. And it's like, it just felt weird to explain. And now I'm like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, I'm a knife maker. I
Yeah.
do design work. And like,
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody thinks,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, confidence is a big part of it, and once you built what you wanna build and you're on the up and up and stuff, and it's it just kinda gives you the credibility of, like, you're not just experimenting and struggling, and it's like, "No,
right,
this is what I really actually do." It's not just something I
right.
dreamed of a week ago or a month ago.
Right. Yeah, it's not like a moonshot. Well, and
Yeah.
I think with the kids, that is something that I would try to convey, which is like if you're doing something and it's on your own, like have confidence in that thing
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
like explain it with confidence. Like you're doing it for you, not for other people.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what they think.
Well, and one of the ways that I've framed it too is it doesn't matter what it is, knives or what have you, but there's so many people on Earth. I mean, there's whatever 8 billion or something, 300 something million in the United States alone. And if you're interested in something and you want to try to make a career out of it, whether it could be extremely odd, off the wall, something really niche, but if you're interested in it, there's a really good chance that there's literally millions of people that are also interested in it. I mean, you're probably not quite that unique that you're the only one in the world that thinks that
Right.
way. And so if you can find that niche and cultivate and get a voice there, there's businesses to be had in such small, seemingly small niches, you know? And that's something I think I'd like to convey to my kids is like just because it's not the petroleum industry doesn't mean you can't
Right.
have a real life doing something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's worlds that you can discover in these spheres that you're interested in.
Yeah, and create yourself and have some control over. Yeah, I think that like I never with the boys, I never think about like, oh, I'm going to bring you into the business, like you're coming into the family business.
Mhm.
If there is a point where they're interested and they want to work with me, I would fully support that. If they never have any interest, like I'm not going to force them to do that. Like I don't need to put my like kind of goals and aspirations on their shoulders.
Mhm.
And with Maddie too, like kind of talking about like, we were talking about like the idea of if she ever wanted to do something outside of the business, like that, that I'm
Yeah.
not going to have any say in that
Yeah.
regardless.
And that brings up a good point of like legacy. Because when I look at my business, so far at least, the way I view it at my age and what I'm doing is that when I retire, if that was the end of Schwartz knives, I mean, it'd be cool to
Hmm.
have some of my designs with CRKT and such continue beyond that or whatever, but it doesn't bother me. Like the thought of this is what I'm doing and it's not necessarily going to stay after I'm gone, it doesn't really bother me. You know what I mean? Like if I have kids that don't want to perpetuate the Schwartz knives brand, it's
Right.
literally I just don't care. Like if they want to do it, that's fantastic, but I'm
Right.
okay with it either way.
Yeah, legacy is an interesting concept in general. I feel like as makers, it's pretty cool to be able to have like a tangible good that will outlast you.
Yeah.
At this point, for me, it's actually like the Sci Pop is the one that I'm almost most excited about because they're so it's so simple. They're gonna just end up in like kitchen drawers and like your grandma or grandpa's like little chest of like I don't know jewelry or like
Mhm.
special objects. It's gonna
Yeah.
get passed down, and I love that.
Yeah.
The first one where I realized that as a process was I sent a knife to Australia. And I was like, I've never been to Australia, but there's like a piece of me that's going to live longer than me that now exists there.
Yeah,
And it
that's
was
cool.
like, it was wild, you know. It was probably 18 years ago or something.
Hmm.
Do you remember a knife maker? I think his name was Jason Cutter. And I think it was
Possibly.
like almost like a stage name. That was not his real name. He was like around like Knife Network and some of like the
Hmm.
early forums.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
was the one who ordered the knife, but
Oh, cool. Yeah, international shipping has a weird feeling to it, especially because now there's so much data on e-commerce. I mean, I'll go on my website and look at who, even just website traffic, who's on there, and the international side of things. I don't know what it is exactly what you're just saying. The thought of it just feels like a different planet because I've never been in a lot of places. You know, I
yeah.
haven't been very far out of the country, and so just like even communicating, maybe it's a DM with someone who knows who you are from another country. It's a just different feeling. You know, I mean, legacy could mean a lot of things. I guess there's name recognition is pretty cool, but I
Hmm.
guess what I would say is
That's
like,
like current context, right?
yeah, I guess what I would say is like, if no one was continuing to make the things,
Yeah.
that doesn't bother me. But it would
Yeah.
be cool for
I'm
the
the same
things
way.
that I did make to be remembered,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. But
The only area where this that doesn't hold is if I were to like pass away early. So I've worked really hard to figure out ways like for my, like life insurance. Okay, cool.
mhm,
Have that. One of the really cool things about like, working with CRKT, you pass away, like Maddie and the kids would continue to get checks.
right, yeah,
That
that's
feels
fantastic.
good. That feels good as someone who's made the majority of my living with my hands, to know that my hands created something that will live beyond me
Yeah.
in like catastrophe.
Oh yeah, that adds a huge different aspect to it. As if, yeah, if my family's still relying on me, then I hope everything I've done can give them some gravy for years.
Well, and also this idea of like, so we have these communities, we build these networks and these relationships. I told Maddie, I'm like, if anything ever happens to me, she's got all my sketchbooks. I'm like, you have the relationships. I'm like, one, like she'd probably reach out to you.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I'd be
Yeah.
like,
Well,
okay, so you're gonna reach out to TJ, you're gonna reach out to CRKT, we're gonna figure out like you're gonna continue to
yeah.
submit,
Well,
you know.
we should form a bond right now. Like, if anything ever happens, then we'll create like a cameo design situation. You know.
I love it. I'm into it.
Yeah.
And same with tools. Where I'm like, look, if something happens to me, like don't have an estate sale. Like you reach out to the people that I know and you figure out how to price the equipment. You figure
Hmm.
out like where those things go. Or like
Yeah.
if there's things makers that I'm friends with that like want a piece, like you want a grinder out of the shop, this stuff I think all ties in with like the idea of family and kids.
Hmm.
I look like the idea of like I pass away and my kids get left my shop. If the shop's not important to them, there's no value in that,
Yeah.
right? Like how many times do you see that estate sale where it's just like everything's going up
Hmm.
and it's someone's entire life.
Hmm.
I never want to put that burden on my kids to be like, oh, like this dad stuff, like it's important. I think it would become important if we can include them in it
Yeah.
and like the process. Kind of separate tangent, but you were talking about traveling. This is another area where I think including kids in the business in a way that is interesting. So a few years ago, we went to the knife festival in Montiago, Italy,
Hmm.
and we took Bo, and we
Awesome.
spent 2 weeks in Italy, and like he got to be part of that. So I think about shows moving forward as the same way. I'm like, well, if we can go do, a show in Paris, that's an area where like it makes sense to I take my kids, they get an experience, they see the industry in a different way.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah. One,
so,
it kind of finishes out that cycle of like, again, going back to the metaphor of the garden. You know, it's
right,
like, show them this is the person that bought the knife right here. You know.
right, yeah. Here's the
Yeah.
tomato we grew.
Yeah.
Like here's where it's going.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like there's this organic kind of flow to it where I think without directly teaching them about business or a lot of elements of kind of what we're doing. I think it just becomes so into, you can integrate them into it. Will you start teaching Delta CAD?
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah,
like a given, right?
yeah.
Like,
Technology. I mean, say what you will about technology, but my kids are going to learn a lot of technology for sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
I feel the same way. I'm
yeah.
like, okay, so like what is play? And it's like, okay, cool. We're gonna go play and build toys on the 3D printer and the
Hmm.
laser.
Yeah.
And like, cool, you like you drew a block. Let's go make that block.
Well, you hear about kids
Like,
that people that became like some kind of .com success or
yeah,
Silicon Valley. You know what almost universally happened? I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard several accounts of this where it's like their parents were into computers
right,
and they got to start typing code in when they were 10 years old.
right,
And by the time they got to college, they weren't even teaching coding in college yet, and they already had a foundation and they started doing it. Boom, Bill Gates. You know what I mean?
right.
Like, not I'm not saying I want my kids to be that. I'm just saying that exposure to the cutting edge now just tease
Right.
them up, whether they use it or not, whatever. But
Well, and that's kind of like that's almost like this futurist thought process that we can engage in, which is really fun. Which is like, okay, we make things the way that we make them, and with our understanding and like our interest coming in. But in that, we know that the this is going to get like weird and heady, but like you understand that there are things that can be created that we may not even think about. So, like, I don't know how to code, but I know that there's coding camps for like 8-year olds or younger at this point. And I'm like, cool, coding. I wish I learned that. If the kids have any interest in it, it's like, cool, you're gonna learn a skill set that I can't teach you, but I understand like the value of.
mhm,
How does that like relate into making or like I don't know. I think it's like learning to ride a bike where you're being supported for a while and then all of a sudden you're like I saw my dad's creativity but I took it in my own direction,
mhm, yeah,
right? So it's like if all I can kind of convey to my kids is like life is balance, like work is not the most
yeah,
important element of your entire life and you can do what you want, I will feel like I've done a pretty good
yeah.
job probably.
Well, and another thing is like it's an Elon Musk quote: "Anything that is learnable on the internet in this modern age." Basically, I mean,
Yeah.
with few exceptions, but you can become extremely well rounded on your own if you're just curious.
Yeah.
And so that comes down to curiosity, which that's kind of a cliche with kids. It's like feed their curiosity, but I think
But
it's
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 not
got to be like the most important thing, right?
like I think yeah, just in general that like understanding what they're going through is as a lot of it is curiosity.
Hmm.
I think it reframes it in a way where you're like, okay, cool, like let's just expand on that.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, like Winston's too right now, and that's like one of my favorite ages because like daily you can just see the amount of like growth and like what they're figuring out, and then they get so psyched when like something works, and you're like, well, yeah, that's like ridiculous. Like, you can't do anything, and then
Right.
all of a sudden, like you opened the doorknob,
Yep.
and you're like, what? Like as a
Yeah.
metaphor, that's huge.
Yeah.
You just opened a door.
Delta figured out all our gate latches, so I screwed pieces of chain on all the posts and put chain and carabiner. So there's the latch and a carabiner. And I'm just watching. I'm like, when's she gonna figure out that carabiner? I know it's
Yeah.
coming because it takes carabiners are a little next level, over a latch. So I know it won't be long, and then I'll have to think of some other weird latch
It
system.
just
But
you're just creating puzzles.
yeah,
So we had here's like a funny kid story that like is like kind of a bad parenting moment also, but like we go into Bo's room one day and he's like, I was like, what are you doing, man? He's like, I'm building a trap. I'm like, okay, cool. And he's like messing with his dresser and string. And like whatever, no problem. It's like I'm gonna preface this with saying it is a very light, like IKEA dresser that is not tall.
hmm,
15 minutes later, we just hear this crash. And we go in. Bo had tied all his drawers with string and then pulled the string. All the drawers came out, changing where the dresser balanced. and,
Dang.
and it trapped him. And I was like, well,
Oh, geez.
I was like, there's the lesson. Like you
Yep.
created a trap and it worked.
Yep. Learned the lesson right there.
So yeah, I was like, okay, this is why people bolt everything to the walls.
Yep. Yep. It's yeah. There was a phrase someone told me one time that it sounds dark, but I kind of like it. It's that parenting in part is supervised failure. The supervision is important,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
letting your kid do something stupid is beneficial, even though it sounds like you said that's a bad parenting moment. But I would argue that, I mean, like you said, it wasn't, you're not talking about a situation that's truly deadly or
Right.
something, but failure that is within reason is a good
Right.
thing with kids.
Right. Well, and what is a teachable moment? Like I struggle a lot of times to like not over teach.
Hmm.
Like in my brain, I'm like, everything's a teachable moment. Like, let's get into this. And
Hmm.
I'm like, no, like sometimes you just need to
Yeah.
like let it be.
Yeah.
But there are those things like, that was done. I was like, all right, it's like, this is why we have to like pay attention to what we're doing. Or like, this is why when dad says not to do something or to like be careful, like, this is what we're talking about.
Hmm.
Like, how could we
Yeah.
have done that different? Like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I don't know. We're going to get into a lot of it, I'm sure, but it's overall, I feel like our system is working pretty good. This is something that I would love to hear. Like, if anybody listens to this and this is something you guys have experience with, like, I would love to hear feedback. We're listening to like so many parenting podcasts and like Big Little Feelings and like, Good Inside with Dr. Becky and like trying to like wrap all this around the idea of like being an obsessive essentially inside of a craft.
Hmm. And doing it at home, which I think is
Right.
unique for you and I and some other people, is that
Some other people.
we're like in the environment where our kids are raised is where we work also.
Right.
That's an interesting, I think we touched a lot of the ups and downs of that on this
Would you
podcast.
say
So
though that like, I mean, the idea of going to work is like a relatively modern concept. You know what I mean? If you look at like
yeah,
the history of people working, I would guess that for a lot of time, I mean, farming in like agrarian society is probably the easiest way to like wrap that.
right.
Where you're like you're a rancher, you're a farmer, it's the same thing. We're just working in a shop, not
Well,
in like a
yeah.
pasture.
Well, and yeah, it's an American creation, I think, because it's the Industrial Revolution and the factory, the assembly line. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know that it's totally American, but America was basically built the last century on that premise of the
Right.
9 to 5. But like, I mean, just circling back to my war history understanding is like Japan, for example, in the 40s during the war, they would build the parts for aircraft and such in their houses. So people would be, you'd be the one like, I'm assembling carburetors for aircraft engines, and they would give you the little things you needed, and like they'd give you a cart, and you'd like roll it down the street to your house, and you and your family would be like putting together carburetors, and then they would roll it on a cart like down the street to where the guy would put the carburetor on the head, and then the guy, and it was literally like the town would like just make all the parts and stuff,
I think
and
culturally that's still common.
mhm,
Depending
yeah,
on the industry, like I know that's true for elements of like the knife industry in
right,
different areas. So you have like Seiki City, or
yeah,
you have Toledo, or Maniago, or Solingen. There are home industries that surround
right,
manufacturing
right.
industries.
And I think
Less
again,
common in the States.
yeah, I think it's just the states went full on factory efficiency, and so that's the yeah we're seeing echoes of that, and whether it's permanent, whether it's fading, I don't know. That's a whole nother
Well,
podcast. I'll tell you
I
that.
think a lot of I think a lot it is another podcast. That's like we just do
That's a good
like a
one.
history of work.
That's a good one.
Like
I have to research a
um
little bit, but that'd be fun.
that would be fun. Some of like the like Western concepts around like work and drive and parent, like I don't know if parenting actually ties into this, but like that desire to put work above all else,
Hmm.
I think is like a fairly Western concept,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Like I don't know, it's not island style, I don't think.
Right, right.
There's some it but it is it's hard when there's a passion level, because like left to my own devices, I'm probably just gonna like hang out in my shop.
Hmm.
If I was a bachelor, I'd probably have like a shouse
Yeah.
you know,
No,
and I'd live above my shop and I'd
I've
just
thought the
make
same
stuff
thing. I've
like,
thought the same thing. Just buy an acre, put a giant steel building on it with like one
yeah,
insulated thing up at the top. Yeah.
yeah. You're just like
Yeah.
a grumpy old retired man, like
Yeah.
who's 30.
Yeah.
Like,
I got my coffee machine over in front of my CNC and
yeah,
my toasters over by the lathe. Yeah. Like, yeah.
still
Right.
sounds pretty good,
It
actually.
does. It
I
does.
don't
But
know.
well,
So here's another one, kind of just a general for the rest of the year. I know you're super busy. Have you like created some space like for your family or like travel or like an area where you can like fully detach from work to spend time
we
with your family?
we go to my wife. I married in the right family because her grandparents on both sides were old time Idaho folks, and they bought cabins in Idaho back when it was dirt cheap, and they still have them. And so we go to those cabins very frequently, and so that's kind of the getaway for the family.
And
And
it's frequent.
yeah, camping will be a big one. But like I said, with a little baby, the cabins are kind of better for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we very frequent. Like we got married at one of them. I mean, last summer was a little different because I mean, I think it kind of got away from us, which I was bummed about. We just got busy and all that. But this summer's been good, and generally going to those cabins is we do it a lot, a lot, a lot. So very
Nice.
very common. So that's our escape is go to the mountains, go to a cabin, or maybe like we've even rented a hotel in a nice little quiet Idaho mountain town or something. We
Just
we
get
did that
away.
a couple month ago or so.
Nice.
Yeah, that's our thing.
Nice.
How about you?
Kind of here and there, like we've got a coast trip planned with some friends that have kids. We're gonna try to get out at this point, family, like we haven't traveled to see family. So like my dad's down in New Mexico, Maddie's family's out in Massachusetts and down in LA. So we're like overdue for like some kind of like family trip. So we're trying to
Yeah,
figure that out kind of for the
yeah,
fall. I'm
sounds
getting
fun.
ready for a show right now, which is up in Portland. But I'm just doing one show this year. The cutting back on shows is fully around kids.
Yeah, there you
It's
go.
just right now. It's Maddie and I do this thing a lot, or have this saying like yes, but later, that comes into play a lot where it's like, oh, that's a great idea, but later.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so
it's fun to
yeah,
do, but not too much, not too often.
yeah. So
Yeah.
trying to figure out like a family centric workflow
Hmm.
that's still satisfying for me and Maddie
Yeah,
and like financially viable,
yeah.
but like trying to utilize some of the flexibility that like we created.
Hmm.
Um, so
So
yeah.
I've got a final question that
Okay.
everyone wants to know for you.
Okay.
At what age are your sons getting their first knife that they get to keep?
Bo, Bo, whew, knives are really, oh man. Okay. Let me back into this one. I like tools and weapons being used loosely, like thinking about like firearms based around function, not fantasy.
Hmm.
So the idea of a knife, like day to day life for us, like Bo doesn't need a knife in the house after school to like look at.
Hmm.
I bought him a couple of Mora knives for when we go camping.
Hmm.
When we're camping, he has a knife and he's learning to use knives.
Hmm.
I just really feel that like the functional aspect is like where you get the respect for a
Yeah,
tool,
yeah.
um,
Making
and
sure it's
using it. Yeah, I think growing up for me, I think I did a lot of like fantasy based like play and planning.
hmm
And I just realized now I'm like, man, the things that I really enjoy are the things that I use.
yeah.
And the
Context
use
is
is
key.
what context is key.
Hmm.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
think like 4.5, he got his
yeah,
first knife.
yeah. That sounds reasonable. Yeah, I've got Delta. I got her a Victorinox fake kids folding knife. I mean, she's only
Nice.
2, so she's nowhere near. But we got her some vegetables that are made out of wood that you cut with a wooden knife and
Oh
stuff. So
yeah, our kids had those too.
starting to get her into that. So
Well, you got like so. Bo and Winston both go to a little like a Waldorf school, and they have like they'll make like soup on Thursdays, and they cut the vegetables with like a little plastic knife, but it's real interactive. So they've got plastic kitchen knives. And then Opinel actually makes this super cool kitchen knife called the Little Chef. That is like, Bose had that for probably close to 2 years. That's my favorite thing because that's a knife used in its like best capacity, which
Mm-hmm.
is you're capable and you're caring for others.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
badass,
Put to a
right? Like,
real use. Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, it's put to real use. And it's like, okay, you're not like cutting a seatbelt or like, cutting your way
Yeah.
outside of like an airplane,
Yeah.
but you're feeding
Using
your
it to
little brother
serve.
cucumbers.
Yeah. That's
It's
cool.
pretty cool. All
Well, man,
right.
this was a fun one. This
It
is good.
was.
We had to work for it. I don't know if you guys knew we had a technical difficulties and all this, so we're happy to
Yeah.
have sat here and had this conversation. It was a
Yeah,
fun one.
that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. Hope you guys enjoy it. To sound very podcasty, leave us a review, share the podcast.
Yeah.
Want to see where this thing goes.
Want to hear what you guys
Leave us some
think.
questions. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, we love it.
And
Appreciate
cool.
you
We'll see you
guys.
around.
Bye bye.
Take it easy.